My name is Vincent Yellow Woman from Siksika. Today I'm alone working. My colleague got called to a meeting. So anyways, I'm glad that you're here with us and joining us in a good way to continue to learn about what's happening and what did happen and so forth. At the end of my talk, I want to give out a shout out to two individuals that impact my life in a powerful way. Because I shared my story in different places, and a lot of people have asked me, how did you make it through? You went through a lot, and so they're interested, they just want to know, and so there's people that did some good things in my life, so I want to share with those a little bit later. Well, we left off last week about talking about the 94 calls to action. 94 calls to action. And my encouragement to everybody is to download them on your computers, on your iPhones, whatever you work with, on kind of a device that you have. I think that is very key, very key. When we're talking about residential school, the impact, and because someone told me, he said, Vincent, how long can you talk about your story all the time? You get invited to speak, and I do share my story, and but I feel a lot of times what's needed is the next steps, and what the next steps are the 94 calls to action. You hear about some issues that went on and some things that took place historically, and then we find out some things that took place after, and then where we are today. And now all of a sudden, we want to go in a new area of our lives and work together. Where is this taking us? How do we get there? So I'm glad people are asking, what are they going to do? How can they help? And they're reaching out to First Nations across Canada. And the 94 calls to actions are key. They're very key. If you're a religious organization or at a school or whatever organization that you're with, I would encourage you guys to download that and look at that. Those 94 calls to action are for all of us. They're not just for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, but they're for all of us, all Canadians. The Prime Minister said that this was a Canadian issue, so we need to all work together on this. So that's key, and in that it will help us to understand and appreciate some of the things that took place and where we want to go from there. There's 94 calls to action, 94 of them. And the first one, there's two parts to it. There's two parts to the 94 calls to action. The first part is the legacy, the history, historical events that took place. And that's important to know. And survivors today continue to tell their stories of what took place. And I want to mention this. When we're talking about, myself personally, when I tell my story and others tell their story. We're talking about the era that took place historically in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. I wasn't around, and a lot of us weren't around at that time. But historically, the decisions that were made and the legislations that came down from Ottawa to here in Siksika and all across Canada with First Nations, and how to deal with what they said back then was the Indian problem. So we need to separate what took place at that time to today. And so some of the issues that took place, there were terrible things that took place in that time. But now here we are. And there's a reason for that. And that's why I thought about it. What is a good way of making an illustration of what's the difference between now and what took place historically. So there's two parts to the 94 calls to action. The first part is legacy. It will tell us about historically what took place, First Nation people, and the history of residential school. That's key. I think it's an understanding for people to know what took place in our lives back then. And then the second part is key for all Canadians. And not only for First Nations, but for all Canadians, where we talk about reconciliation. What is it to reconcile with each other? Some of the things that took place back then, and the decision that was, the recommendation was, that was given after they did the hard work. And I need to mention those three individuals that did the hard work, the hard task of gathering those information and hearing the stories for 6 years from survivors. They went across Canada. These three individuals are Justice Murray Sinclair, one, and then the other one is Wilton Littlechild from Musqueam, and then the third one is Dr. Marie Wilson from BC. And there were others that worked with them, but these three individuals, they did the hard work with others to gather the stories, to gather survivors and hear those stories. The 94 calls to action will address some of those stories and some of the things that took place, and you can go further into that when you Google the history of residential school, and some stories will pop up and so forth. It's key to know what took place, and I'm glad that they took 1 to 42 calls to action to address the legacy of 94 and some solutions and some things that they felt like it was a good recommendation to help us, all of us, to move forward. So I want to talk about just two things, and because there's 94 of them, and we can't spend a lot of time on all of them, but I do want to mention one from the legacy, from the first part, from 1 to 42, and that's the first one, the legacy, legacy 1. It is called to the governments of the province, the governments of the Yukon and so forth, to commit to reducing the number of children in care. And so what they're recommending to reduce the number of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, in reduce the numbers that are in care. And because it just seems like right now there's a big case of them being taken away. So what we learned from the residential school is that some things that took place, and so what they're recommending, we need to be careful and put those numbers down. And then also in that legacy, in the first one, they're saying we need to monitor, to assess, and look at everything, the investigation, and so forth. So that's going to take a bit of time on both, but it needs to be done. And those things are written there for the benefit of the children, to keep in mind that what is the best interest of the children. And so when these three individuals with great minds, with their lawyers and legal experts, they're saying we need to help our children, and we just don't need to just go in the house and take them away. We need to reduce the numbers, and we need to assess, and we need to monitor and do the investigating, to do the due diligence and so forth. So that's important. I think that's a good one. And then the other one is to provide adequate resources to enable Aboriginal communities to work with children that are in care. And we need the adequate resources. And today it's a challenge. Today it's a struggle. And so I'm glad that they're pointing that out. That's key. And we know the issues that took place. We know the challenges that took place. Here are some things that are happening today, and here are some things that will help us and so forth. And then the other one is to to keep the children in a culturally appropriate environment. That simply says to make sure that our children are not being forced to adapt into someone else's culture. Like in the 1800s and the early 1900s, the decision back then was to change the Indian in the child. And they used the word to kill the Indian in the child, to kill the culture, to kill the language, and so forth. And what they're recommending is we need to make sure the culture of children that are in care, that is in place. And that's important. I think Chicago and Illinois, and just outside the big city of Chicago, I flew in, and I don't know how many people were there. There was several hundred people there. There were others there, and other speakers, and so forth. And so it was a good week. It was a good gathering. And a lot of First Nations from America, Canada were there, and they were learning about our culture and so forth, and residential school came up and so forth. So it was a good week, challenging to talk about some of the issues, but to bring hope and for the people to move forward in a good way. At the end of our conference, one lady, I would probably say she was around 20 to 25 years old, just a young girl, just a young lady. She came up to me and talking to us, the elders that were there, and she said to me, she was taken away, and she grew up with a family that wasn't native, and but now that she's older, she wants to find her roots. That's what she used. I want to go back and find out my roots, who my family was, who my tribe is, who my people are, and so forth. In other words, culturally, she did not know anything about who she was. She didn't speak her language. She had no knowledge of her culture and so forth. And she said to me, there's just one thing that I ask from you guys. And I said, what is it that you would want? He said, it would mean so much to me to have an Indian name. It would mean so much to me to have an Indian name. And I looked at the others, they looked back at me, and I said, it can be done. We'll do it for you. So in a little bit, we called everybody together, several hundreds of them, and they told the story, what I just told you. And we gathered everybody, and we bestowed upon her a native name, a First Nation name, and in this case, a Blackfoot name. And I gave her a Blackfoot name. And she was just so emotionally, she was just so grateful. And I think about a lot of kids that are in care, a lot of kids that culturally didn't have an understanding, didn't know who they were, and that was taken away from them. And this girl represented that. And then when the ceremony was done and gave it back to the MC, she came up to me and she was hugging me and crying. And she said, I just feel like I got my identity back. My identity back. Just the one way that is so valuable to us in our culture is bestowing upon our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, Indian names. And with me, I give my grandchildren their Blackfoot names. So she was just so happy she got a native name. So that's what they're saying here in 94 Calls to Action. So when you study it, when you read it, that's what you're going to find, that we need to place children in an environment where culturally their language and who they are as a native person, a native child, is encouraged. The other one that I wanted to talk about briefly is there's two parts to it. The first part is the legacy. The second part is the reconciliation. The reconciliation of the 94 Calls to Action. What is that? And so you go to 57, I think, if you can put that up on the screen. 57, Calls to Action number 57. That's the second part, talking about the reconciliation. And so what they're saying is that we want to encourage this, the way. I had a conversation with one of my friends, and I said the first part is the legacy. It helps us to understand what took place. And then the second part, it's for all Canadians to know about reconciliation. Because because someone will come to me after I speak and they'll say, I wasn't there, I feel so bad about what happened to residential school survivors, and what can I do to help you? And so what they're saying here is to educate and to train, and that is to talk about residential school. And they're encouraging corporations like the banks, like for instance the Bank of Montreal. It has I don't know how many employees, and a few years ago I was invited to go speak at a big bank in Calgary, and so they had over 100 of their staff. So what they're saying here is to encourage people that businesses, organizations, schools, universities, and churches and so forth to educate themselves, to bring experts and to bring survivors in, to bring in people that know about what it is the 94 calls to actions, what do they mean, and so forth. And so what they're saying is to educate people. I could do just a bit, so to have an understanding of who we are as Native people. And that never took place. What is it? What this First Nation community over there? Who are they? And so what they're saying, to reconciliation, to reach out and to have a communication and to sit down and to learn from each other. And once you get an appreciation of each other, then we can work together and then we can move forward in a good way. And then also with that, you'll have an appreciation what took place in residential school again. And you'll hear stories from survivors again. And so what they're saying is that these organizations, post-secondary education, and all those would have an opportunity to learn and appreciate. That's the 94 calls to action. And this one is in number 57. What are the next steps? It's right here. The next step is to, it's going to allow these organizations to open their doors, to allow people and to reach out to each other, to work together in a good way, and to learn about who we are, our culture, and so forth, and the residential schools, and then also to learn about our treaties. What is a treaty Indian? What are treaties? The old treaties, then we have the modern day treaties. Then you hear stories the treaties were broken. And what they're saying, to encourage organizations and groups to learn about all these, about who we are and what those treaties mean, and what it meant to Kistunu, what it meant to us, the treaties, and the Aboriginal rights. What are those? And a lot of people don't understand about politics and so forth, and it gives them an opportunity to reach out and say, okay, now the onus is on me as the president of this university. The onus is on me as the president of this CEO of this company to learn about what treaties are, what Aboriginal rights are, and to reconcile with First Nation communities. And then it talks about the crown relationships. What is a crown relationship? You're on crown land and so forth. And there's a lot on that, and there's more that we could talk about, the relationships and the knowledge and the understanding that people can do the research on getting to know us, what we went through politically, what are some of the things and some of the decisions that took place. And if you're a good student and you like studying and you like to know researches, and you go into your computer, you go into your books, and it'll give you an opportunity to find out, okay, here's what the treaties are, here's what they mean to the First Nation, and that's being part of the reconciliation. And 94 calls to action. There's a whole lot we can talk about, and certainly there's much more that can be said. And I've been talking to different ones that encouraging them to be more vocal when it comes to the reconciliation, the 94 calls to action. Because right now people are saying, what is it that I need to do? So my advice to all of you is to get a copy of the 94 calls to action. Get a copy of the 94 calls to action and read it. Don't just leave it in your computer, but read it. Read the 94 calls to action, and you get a good appreciation of what these three guys did, what this whole TRC group were trying to accomplish. And there's, like Murray Sinclair said 3 weeks ago, he said that the question was asked to him, what do you think is going to happen with about the recognizing the TRC on Orange Shirt Day? He said it's a start, but we got a long ways to go. And to shorten that long ways to go is to know the 94 calls to action. And some of you have good friends that are that know the legal language and so forth. They would be able to explain to you some of those. But I like reading it, and these are two of the things I have brought forward today. So I would encourage you to get a copy of that and learn about the 94 calls to action. I want to share something with you on a personal note. The reason I say that is that at the beginning I said some things that took place in the late 1800s, some things, the horrible things that took place, the legislation that took place and so forth. And the survivors that went through some horrendous things that took place. And so when I share my story, people say to me, how did you make it through? How did you survive? How we hear of statistics and sad stories, but how did you survive? Well, I am grateful for people that are very positive in my life. People that had such a tremendous influence in my life. There's a lot of them that I can mention, and I'm so grateful for that. But I want to mention two individuals that helped me not to be one of the sad statistics, because alcohol just about destroyed my life. And I would have never been if I kept on drinking, I probably would have never reached the age of 25. And because of what I was going through and so forth. But two individuals came into my life and really inspired me and encouraged me and understood some of the things that were happening to me and what I was going through and so forth. And the first one is I want to mention and very grateful for, and that was my mother. My mother was one that was very spiritual, and she had tremendous faith in God and was always praying for her children and for myself and so forth. And she would always talk to me and say to me, "You need to quit drinking. You need to change your ways. And I'm praying for you." And she didn't yell at me or stuff like that. And I respected her, and so she was one. And actually, not at the peak, she takit sa pa usapukwa to siumi they takikinapay tapisi when I was in an area of my life, when I was in a very dark place. They were a spark to me in those dark places. And my mom was a spark to me. She would just glow with the radiance of a genuine concern and love for me, and telling me to quit drinking, to quit what I was doing, that it wasn't gonna help me. So with her prayers, I just want to say, she's gone home. She's not here with us anymore. She left us years ago, and I did obey her, and through her prayers, I am so thankful for that. The other one I want to mention is that really inspired me. My mom at the beginning, and then when I got more into my life, having a family and having grandchildren and so forth, my mentor, my hero in the faith, that really inspired me and encouraged me to continue on and to be the man that I needed to be. And that was Reverend Margaret Waterchief. Reverend Margaret Waterchief. I went to her funeral, and her grandchildren, her children were talking about her, and they said they would see her writing notes and writing stuff, things like that. Well, I was one of those that she wrote notes to, letters to me, and I still have those letters, and they're so very powerful to me. And Reverend Margaret Waterchief, she would always say, stay strong, stay in the faith, never mind what's happening. And there was one time that in my political life, it was pretty dark, it was pretty gloomy, I suppose, and I don't know, but she, at that right time, she came up to my house and she just told us that she was praying for us, and she gave me a note, and so I read that, and she was also a spark in a dark time that I was going through, and so she had tremendous influence in my life. And both of them are Blackfoot speaking people. Both of them very much culturally involved. Both of them not ashamed of the heritage of who we are as Siksika people. And I would tell my mom, I'm going to go to a powwow, and she would encourage me to go. And Margaret Waterchief was one that when I go to a powwow, I would see her and her children, her grandchildren. And so these people were very, very, very inspiring to me. So when someone asks me, how did you make it? How did you survive? I hear stories of others that did not make it, but you made it. There were those two individuals that were a tremendous influence in my life. So I'm forever grateful for that. And so I don't like to talk about a lot of times my personal journey, and but I just want to mention that. And I know both of them would say to me, if they were here, if Reverend Margaret Waterchief was here and my mom was here, they would say to me, tell them it's the Lord Jesus Christ. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. And because they don't want to take the glory. And that's what they would say. And these two individuals point the way for me to have a good relation, a personal relationship with the Lord. And so that's how I made it, and continue today. And of course we have struggles, but we just continue to pray. So I'm going to leave that with you guys, and next week hopefully my colleague will be back, and we can continue talking about residential school. And with that, I'm going to ask these guys, do you have a copy of, oh, okay, good. Okay. Before Reverend Margaret Waterchief passed away, one of the last times that she was with me, I invited her to come to a Sunday morning video that we had going at the beginning of the COVID. All the churches were shut down, everything was closed, and so I told her, Margaret, can you come and share with us whatever the Lord has in your heart? And she agreed, she came. At the end of her talk, I told her, Margaret, pray for us. And she did that. She used the Lord's Prayer. And so I'll end the program today with her prayer. Thank you.
Hayo kindon nisipata. Itam skrachkui kuku. Nita patwa pi kitsinihka semena kokawatu itsi. Hayo nako tseptot kitsina isin. Hani kanstauka kitsmatopi tam skrachkui. Anokkanistauka kitsmatot noksachkui. Nokatrukinana noksistiko iknapain. Minukat desknet nitsipksapsinnanist. Nituita kokatanistastiksu koamananomiks nitrukomistotokinaaks. Minokomaiks kukin. Nokkaikamotsipiokinan saumitsitapida kitawaistrukukin. Kistuana kititukanein. Kititukanaskunataps. Kititukanawatuaps. Kimatkusikti. Amen.